I just want to say thanks so much for coming down tonight. It's quite a nice day out there, so thank you for coming down here to listen to me talk. And thank you to those people on Zoom who have joined in. So yeah, my name is Lucy Arrowsmith, and I'm going to basically take us into a deep dive of the world of an ocean giant. And there is a clue on the screen to which species we've got there. Is this going to work? We can just click. We'll just click. There we go. We'll just go with this. Cool. So the ocean is full of a range of species, right down from our smallest to our largest. And some of these larger animals travel huge extensive movements all across the world. And these are known as migratory marine megafauna. And these species are some of our most charismatic that are out there. There are whales, our seals, our marine mammals, our turtles, and our sharks. Marine megafauna are large marine vertebrate species that generally consist of high trophic level predators within the marine environment. They occupy multiple layers of the food web, and they're located in both nearshore and open ocean locations. They act as indicators for the health and sustainability of our ecosystems through regulating the richness of prey and activity of these prey species as well. So as you can probably guess, migratory marine megafauna are found in all parts of the globe, from the Arctic Circle to the tropics, and the movements are influenced by a number of oceanographic and physical parameters, all related to food availability, migration, and reproductive purposes. Now, the world's coastlines and the world's oceans are incredibly busy. And what you are looking at here is every shipping lane that is around the world. It's a very busy and very noisy place. And this has resulted in a number of threats being faced towards marine megafauna on a global scale. And these include being struck by shipping vessels, which cause injury when they come into contact with them when they're close to the surface, marine pollution and litter, being overfished, or being caught as bycatch within gill nets and fishing nets. Our oceans are warming, and this is also causing a change in the habitats that these species reside in. And for sharks in particular, shark finning is a major problem that is going on still today. Most of these animals are classified as endangered on the International Union for Conservation of Nature Red List, with 48% classified as threatened, near threatened, or data deficient. And that essentially means that we actually don't know that much about them to be able to establish what threats they are facing around the world. So why should we care about these animals? Essentially, all marine megafauna stabilize the marine ecosystem. If you take out a top predator, everything else below that is going to suffer. They change the dynamics of our ecosystem. They move around prey. They are able to stabilize sediment flow and look at cleaning up our oceans as well. When large species die, they can sink to the ocean floor, which produces a huge amount of food for a number of different species all the way through the water column. Outside of the oceans, these species are incredibly important to us. Not only do they, as fish, supply food for local communities, but they actually bring a huge amount of income through tourism. And when we look at that, especially here in Australia as well, we can find that going out and looking at these marine megafauna, we're finding that they're worth more alive than they are dead. And in some countries, shark tourism alone has boosted the number of the economic benefits over shark finning. So it's really important, and it's going to be a massive thing for the future that we rely on tourism to protect these species. Now, one of the most charismatic and largest fish in the ocean is the whale shark. It is a fish, not a whale. And this is because it does not need to come to the surface to breathe. It uses its gills to filter water through for the oxygen. It spends time at the surface and in the deep waters, migrating through the water column as it does so. And whale sharks are also an ectotherm. And this essentially means they rely on external sources of temperature to heat their body, which is why we often find them close to the surface heating in the sun, which means they're able to then dive down into cooler waters to release that body temperature that is going up. Now, whale sharks don't just operate on a horizontal plane, they also operate on a 3D environment, meaning they move vertically through the water column. These movements can be in response to food availability and techniques, as well as a number of shapes in these dive profiles demonstrating that. So various shapes have also been identified in air breathers. So in the V-shaped dives and the U-shaped dives, which are seen as searching and foraging. And these also been seen to be found in whale shark movements, which has actually been documented across a number of studies. Now, the distribution and abundance of whale sharks are known to be influenced by a number of physical and biological conditions, such as sea surface temperature, salinity, ocean currents, and bathymetry, all contributing to the upwelling of nutrient-rich waters. Whale sharks have often been described as the Goldilocks species, meaning they don't like that water temperature too hot or too cold, but instead they find a perfect balance. And that temperature range has been found to be between 26 to 29 degrees. This does mean that whale sharks can be found in cooler and warmer waters, but for the majority of their time, they reside within that common temperature band. So what does the largest fish in the ocean eat? Well, essentially it eats one of the smallest things in the ocean. They feed on plankton, small krill, shrimp, and coral and crab larvae. They have about 300 rows of very tiny teeth, but these are not used for feeding. They're more of that's been passed down through being a shark species. A lot of the feeding behavior coincides with spawning events, and we find that they feed at different layers during the time of day. So what they feed on is called the deep scattering layer, which is dial migrating organisms which move from the surface waters at night to the deeper waters during the day to avoid prey. So whale sharks use 3 types of feeding behaviors. They use passive, which is basically where they slowly swim with their mouths open, just filtering the water through and collecting the plankton. They use vertical feeding, which is what you can see in the picture here, which is when they become near vertical in the water column and they show no movement, and they basically just suction the food through to their mouths. And they also have active feeding, also known as ram filter feeding, where they just swim with their mouths completely open through the water column, and a very high velocity of water is passed through with the plankton coming in. So they have quite a varied type of feeding behavior to be able to get as much food through their body as possible, because they are so large. So they do need the maximum amount of food possible for them to sustain their growth. So as I mentioned, dive patterns have been suggested as different strategies of feeding. So if we go closer into that, what you're seeing here is depth against time. And these different strategies have been seen as searching for prey, shown through the V-shaped dives where they go up and down through the water column, and then foraging, shown through a U-shaped dive where there's a relatively constant depth with small undulations suggested of feeding before they come back up to the surface. A lot of these dive patterns occur simultaneously next to each other, so they could be searching for food and then go down into that layer where they find that food and stay there for a relatively constant time. Inhabiting all tropical and subtropical waters except the Mediterranean, whale sharks seasonally migrate between open oceans and nearshore locations. And this is where, what you're seeing here is the known aggregation sites around the world. This is where large numbers of them gather at a particular place for a period of time, and it's dependent on a number of different features. This can be because of spawning events. So like what happens here at Christmas Island, whale sharks are coinciding when the crab spawning event happens, which is when red crabs come from the forest to the sea floor, spawn in the nearshore waters where about 1.5 trillion crab larvae are released. Because the whale sharks then coincide with this, we think they're getting quite a good amount of food and energy from this supply. Aggregations are also in association with warm, shallow waters in close proximity to shelf edges. And all these factors contribute to that nutrient-rich water that we know that they like to reside in. And this is exactly what happens at Ningaloo. So we're so lucky here in WA that we've actually got a whale shark aggregation. And it's a huge hotspot that occurs between March to June, with whale sharks being seen in a few months either side of that as well. Generally, the arrival of whale sharks coincides with the coral spawning events into the warm waters. And like most documented aggregation sites, they are mostly made up of juvenile males. Recent evidence has shown that males generally grow faster in a shorter space of time before they plateau at a growth rate, whereas females grow slower but larger. And this is potentially because the females are able to store sperm, which means they don't need to grow as quick, as fast, whereas males could potentially be for competition. With females getting larger, like in most animals around the world, it could be for an offspring. However, this is something that we don't particularly know much about. So despite all our recent evidence that we have found with whale shark movements, we actually don't know where they breed or pup. However, the only time we've actually ever seen a pregnant whale shark was in a Taiwan fishery back in 1998, I think it was. And she had over 300 embryos found inside of her, all at different life stages, which is where we thought that the idea that they store sperm comes from, because if you've got different life stages going on inside you, there has to be a way for that to occur. So back in 2013, people started spotting baby whale sharks off the coast of India, but this was all documented, just hearsay. But in 2017, one was actually caught in a gill net, and this was the footage that they collected. So this is courtesy of the Wildlife Trust of India, which works on protecting whale sharks in that part of the world. So this whale shark was about 94 centimeters long, and it literally looks like someone's just pointed a shrink gun at it and made a whale shark smaller. So this was incredible to see, and it's really important that we actually start researching more of this area to find out if this is where we are finding these juvenile whale sharks. Unfortunately, it is not all happy place for whale sharks in the ocean. Ship strikes account for the highest proportion of injuries sustained for whale sharks due to their close proximity to the surface. They often get hit by boats and props, but this doesn't often cause them fatal damage like death. They actually just have a huge amount of scarring. And in some cases, we've actually seen whale sharks being bitten by sharks. And in years after that, you've actually seen the growth come back. So there is reason to believe that sometimes sharks can actually recover from such events as the tissues start to grow back. A major problem also facing whale sharks is marine plastics and pollution. So in 2019, a whale shark was washed up stranded, and it actually had plastic in its gill plates. Just because where they're filtering everything through, sometimes stuff just is going to get stuck, which is really sad. Luckily, whale sharks are protected in the majority of places around the world. However, illegal fishing and bycatch still occurs for this species. Their fins and liver are worth hundreds of dollars in fishing trade markets. However, there's been a huge push for ecotourism, especially in developing countries, because they're realizing that people want to come to these areas to see these aggregations of these whale sharks. In places like the Philippines and in Mexico, you can get in the water and there's just like 10, 15 whale sharks right in front of you. So definitely this species is worth more alive than it is dead. So what do we know so far? So because of the improvements in technology and advances in whale shark science, we know quite a lot about this species, such as the known aggregation sites. We know that females grow larger than males. We also know the full-term vertical and horizontal movements of these species quite well. Now, occasionally we manage to get long-term tracking data. And this is really important as we're able to look at long distance migrations, as well as all this long-term vertical movement that is going on. We also know that they follow a number of physical and biological conditions, such as sea surface temperatures, frontal zones, food production areas, and they reside in areas with shallow, warm waters, as well as in the deep ocean. But despite knowing all this, there is actually still so much we don't really know about whale sharks to be able to conserve them better. And this is where my PhD comes in. So yeah, as you can guess, I study whale sharks and their behavioural patterns. And I'm in my second year of my PhD, so I've still got a little bit to go. That time pressure is just creeping in. But what I look is looking at how temperature primarily influences these movements, and what are going to be the energetic costs associated with this as our oceans warm or as the food availability decreases for these animals. I also look at diving characteristics, so looking at how time spent at the surface versus time spent at the depth is influenced by their internal core temperatures. So the great thing about doing a PhD on whale sharks is that I get to occasionally go in the field, which is a big bonus. So everything we know about whale sharks comes from incredible science that is usually conducted out in the field. And here in WA, we're so lucky that I'm able to go up to Ningaloo Reef with the Australian Institute of Marine Science and basically do 2 weeks of very intense field work. It is not just a nice swim along a shark. I have never been more exhausted in my entire life. So when we're out in the field, we try and identify the sex of the animal. We take photo IDs, size measurements, we collect eDNA and genetic samples, and occasionally we tag these. But we need a huge team to be able to do this. But spotting a whale shark from the boat is incredibly difficult. They basically blend in with the watercolor, and unless they pop up right next to your boat, which has only happened, I think, 2 times that I've done this field trip, you can't see them. So we have the great help of a spotter plane. So this is taken from Ningaloo Aviation, which is works with a lot of the tour companies up there. And the skipper on our boat and the pilot in the plane are in constant contact with each other, basically telling us where the whale sharks are and how far away we are from them. So when the pilot spots a plane, he lets the skipper know that we're X amount of boat lengths or meters away from the shark, which direction the sharks are going in, and from that, we then head towards them. Once we're in a few meters of the shark, we hope that we can see it, and when we do, we point at it. And that is the best way to keep an eye on the whale shark, because you can see it at the surface, and if you keep saying it's at 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, it gives everyone a really good idea of where it is. So once this happens, it is essentially all hands on deck. The first swimmer jumps into the water and stays with the shark, see if it changes direction, see if it dives, and then he communicates back to the boat using signals. So thumbs up means it's coming up to the surface, thumbs down means it's diving, and we use our hands essentially like this to say which way the whale shark is moving. Then the second person jumps in, and this is the person that is in charge of the photo IDs. And this is an incredibly important job for whale shark identification. So photo IDs basically enable us to see where the whale sharks are going and who they are. So just like us, whale sharks have individual prints as their spots, like our thumbprints. So what we do is we take photos of the whale shark, means we can identify them and see if they're residing in one location or moving around the world. So I'm going to get my whale shark. So what we do is with this, we basically swim up against the whale shark and we take a photo from the last gill sit to the pectoral fin, about this region here, which is what you can see here. And we want to get this on both the left and the right side of the body. So in doing so, it means that when we put it into the algorithm, we can then have both match on either side. Sometimes it doesn't work like that. You try and swim around the tail to get to the other side of the whale shark, and it's like, oh, what are you doing? Oh, bubbles. And it just follows you round and round in a circle. So it kind of proves a bit difficult sometimes. So what we then do is that we put this all into a database when we get back to the lab, and the algorithm identifies the points on the whale shark. And if the whale shark photo is already in this database, it can say, yep, this is the shark. It has been at Ningaloo for X amount of time. Or you can be like, oh yeah, it was found in the Philippines last year. So it's really great use of science to be able to see where these sharks are going. Another way of doing this as well is using scarring patterns. So this shark here is called Stumpy because he has a stump on his tail. And he is regularly found at Ningaloo. I think he was first photographed back in 1996 or 1998. And when I looked today, he was photographed in 2020. So he keeps coming back, and without using photo IDs and the use of the scarring patterns, we wouldn't know that this is a regular shark at Ningaloo. Now, the fantastic thing about this part of science is that everyone can help. So if you're lucky enough to have already swam with whale sharks, or it's something that you really want to do, take a photo of a whale shark and go on to WILDBOOK for whale sharks. On there, you can report an encounter where you then put in your photographs, and it will put the algorithm through and tell you if your shark is on the database. If it's not, woo, you've identified a new individual. Great work. And then from this, you can then track where your whale shark goes. You can see if it's just in one place. And on there, they have a huge amount of information about different types of whale sharks. Most of them are named, and you can also adopt one if you want to. Who doesn't want to adopt a whale shark? So after we've done all our important photo ID stuff, the next thing we do is we measure the whale sharks. So in order to get the length of a shark, we use a piece of equipment called a DOVE, which is this, which stands for Diver Operated Vehicle. This equipment is essentially 2 GoPro cameras on the end of a really long stick. We're very high tech in science. So once the swimmer with the doves remains a few meters away from the shark, we're able to get the full length on video camera. These video cameras are then calibrated before we go in the field at a certain depth range, so we're able to get the full length within the prospect of the cameras. When we get back to the lab, we download the video footage, we put it into a software where it can tell us the length of the whale shark. And this is really important research to look at growth rates in these species. So if we've got the photo ID to identify the individual, we then match it to the camera of the dove, we can then see which sharks are growing over time. And a recent study has actually come out using, I think it was like 10 years of dove footage to show how females grow slower but larger and males grow quicker but remain smaller. And this was all done using dove footage at Ningaloo Reef. So everything about this is so useful for us to look at long-term changes in both growth rates for individuals and in genders as well. Now, one of the really cool things that's coming out of our recent research and science is eDNA, which stands for environmental DNA. And this is a non-invasive way of us to collect DNA from whale sharks. Essentially what we do is we swim behind the whale shark's tail and collect the water. Whale sharks like us shed DNA as they swim. So if you dive underneath, get a litre of water from behind the whale shark, we're then able to put this into software once it's been filtered, and we can hopefully come up with the genome sequencing of individual whale sharks, identify the DNAs of the whale sharks. Again, when you match this with the photo IDs and the doves, we have a huge database available for these individual species. So it kind of just looks like we're collecting a shark fart, and that's what we used to call it when we were on the boat, when it was a very long day of work and we needed a bit of Now, once we've done all that, which takes us approximately under 5 minutes, we're quite quick in and out. We don't want to spend too much time working on these animals. Some of them we're really lucky enough to tag. So this is a colleague of mine, Sammy, who has just started, well, probably like a couple of years ago now, working at Stanford University. And these tags are able to monitor diving behavior, long-term, short-term movements. We can also attach tags to tails, look at tail beat frequencies. We've got acoustic arrays, and we've also got the ability to put cameras on these tags so we can look at where they're going and how they're associating with these prey fields. So there are a number of different types of tags and technologies that are available out there. And tags can be programmed to detach at certain times, such as the pop-up archival tag, which will then pop off the whale shark with a galvanized lock, essentially, float to the surface and transmit its data to the Argos satellite system. We've also got short-term monitoring tags, and then we've also got long-term monitoring, such as the splash tag, which can be used for both horizontal and vertical movements, as well as you're able to download the entire raw archives of the data if you retrieve them back. So here is us tagging a whale shark at Ningaloo. We've done our little photo ID check. And what we do is we place the tag on the dorsal fin of the whale shark using a clamp style attachment, which has got about a 1 meter tether behind it. This then trails behind the whale shark as it goes off and does its thing, we hope. So once it's gone onto the whale shark, it's actually really important that it's attached successfully and that we're able to get this data back. So the important thing that needs to happen is the tag's antenna, which you can see here in the black, needs to break the surface of the water to transmit to the Argos satellite system. It can't do it underwater. Whale sharks don't come to the surface to breathe, so often or not, we don't get this data come through when we want it to. So what we hope, and another great little animation here, is that the whale shark swims to the surface, the fin and the antenna break the surface of the water and transmit to the Argos satellite system using a little beep, 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 beep. And then from that, we can actually get a number of locations, temperature, depth, light levels, which is so important. But this is only transmitted in little segments. So it's ideal that we actually recover these tags. But because whale sharks just go off into the open ocean, we can't exactly follow them. And so what we hope is that the tag will pop off, sit nicely in a current, come to the shore, someone picks it up, gives us a call, we've got your tag. That's kind of what happened with a tag in West Timor. So it detached from the whale shark here, but instead of getting a call, we found that it was just sitting in a house, beeping away for several days. And my supervisor, Dr. Mark Meakin, was like, well, we know it's there. We're going to go get it. So he sent his then PhD student, Conrad, to go and get the tag, which was fantastic because it meant we got a recovered tag, and that was the tag I've got here today. So thinking of that video that I showed you of us tagging the shark, so this goes on to a tether and a clamp system which attaches to the shark. This floats up behind the shark about that distance away. The antenna is quite long, so we hope that it breaks the surface even if the whale shark doesn't come that close to it. So we've got quite a long distance for that to happen. The information is stored in tiny little part of this tag here. And what we're able to do is when we get the tag back, we can take the information from within using basically a USB cable, plug it into your computer, and you can download all the data. Simple, if you get the tag back. So it's really important that this tag recovery occurs. So from now on, when we look at the data in this presentation, it's coming from this tag. So this was when we looked at all the vertical movements downloaded from this tag. And this whale shark traveled 88 days from Christmas Island up to the Banda Sea and back down again to West Timor, where the tag attached. What we're able to see is there's a huge amount of data in here. You've got varied movements right down to 1,200 meters was the deepest dive that this shark did. And it's also being experienced in very shallow areas coming up onto shelf edges. But overall, it stays less than 600 meters, which is really interesting to see because it's in waters that are 7,000 meters deep. So it was kind of interesting as to why it's staying in that area. So part of my PhD was that I wanted to look at how this whale shark moved around with temperature. Because our oceans are going to be warming, and they are now, it would be really interesting to see how these whale sharks are going to be able to continue moving around and coming into coastal regions. So what you are looking at here is a sea surface temperature plot from 24 to 34 degrees. This little cross right here is Christmas Island, which is where the whale shark was tagged. So basically, just to summarize, we know that whale sharks follow a favourable sea surface temperature of 24 to 29 degrees. And it's so important that we look at both the horizontal and the vertical behaviours to understand these movements. So much data out there is just focusing on one aspect, but if you pull them together, we're able to see a huge amount of information that is going on. And this is why recovery of tags is so important. It's so difficult, but it's so important. But what does this mean for whale sharks? So as I've previously said, and up here, there is that preferred sea surface temperature range. As our oceans are warming, what is that going to happen for whale sharks? Well, they actually occur in the Red Sea, which has got a very high water temperature. But again, we think that the food availability is so high that they're able to reside in these temperatures. I personally think that it's going to come down to their food. If their food is not able to stay in the coastal regions, we're going to find that whale sharks are going to be moving further offshore, away from these coastal aggregations. And what is that going to mean for the tourism industry? We already know that a lot of places are seeing a reduction in marine megafauna, and we really hope that that doesn't start to happen with whale sharks around the world. Thank you so much for coming, and thanks to everyone on Zoom. Hope you enjoyed it. Oh, and I welcome any questions. Oh, this is a life-size pup. Yeah, great question. So research at Ningaloo has been going on for years. I think, was it 80s? I'm looking at 80s, 90s, around that, I would say that time. And we get them, like we have huge numbers that come through, but some years it just fluctuates. Some years we won't get any in during the first few months of what is known as the aggregation season, but we'll get them all the way through to August and September. And so far we're not entirely sure of why this is happening. Some people think it's something to do with the moon, which is like a very good reason for that as well. In terms of numbers, I don't think the numbers are decreasing too much at Ningaloo. I know that they had some of their busiest seasons have been in the last few years. When we were there in 2019, in the 2 weeks we were there, we had 130 plus encounters. And then this year when we went, we only saw 34. But we went a month later in the season. And so there is a huge change in the numbers that you can see. But I know that I follow quite a lot of the tour operators. Yeah, so they put pictures up all the time, and they're still seeing whale sharks now. They've started doing their humpback tours earlier this year because of coronavirus, because a lot of people weren't able to come over for the whale shark season. And what they're actually finding is that you get in to do a humpback tour and you see a whale shark. So it's kind of like win-win, which was good. Yep. Oh, wow. That's such a good question. Yeah, I love international collaboration. I was really fortunate to be able to go to India last year to work with the guys at Wildlife Trust of India. And I found that some of the greatest scientists are in every other country around the world. I think there's been a big push now for more collaborative research. My supervisor, Anna Sequeira, is part of huge papers which collaborate with so many people from around the world with so much tracking data. So being able to have that possible link there is really exciting. And I think science is kind of moving away from a one-man job. So many people have data that it's so exciting to be able to share it. Because it also means that PhD students, you know, we like to get our names on papers to get us hopefully a job. So being able to collaborate with a lot of people opens a lot of doors. Thank you. Yep, so tagging happens all like in all those aggregation sites pretty much. In Ningaloo, there's, I don't think AIMS necessarily tag that much anymore. We usually do it for help with other people. But I know that Brad Norman, who is part of Ecocean, he does some tagging, and so do people at CSIRO. So there's still quite a lot of tagging research that's coming out, but it's more trying to look at different ways and different associations of doing tagging. So the eDNA stuff is really exciting to come out because it's a non-invasive way of collecting information. Often than not, whale sharks might not react to us tagging, and sometimes they do. So it's actually quite nice to be able to have a non-invasive way of us to be able to collect some information. So a lot of the whale sharks in Ningaloo potentially go up to Indonesia. So in the other side of the Banda Sea is a bay called Cendrawasih Bay. And so sometimes we think that they might be connected that way. There was been reports of them leaving the Gulf of Mexico and coming quite far east as well. So I think the longest recorded track was about 20,000 kilometers, but we're not quite sure if that was a floating tag or attached to the shark because it was just horizontal data. But even just the long-term attachments, like this one's gone 6,500 kilometers. So they can travel like a huge distance, which is super exciting. And hopefully there's more technology out there, which means that long-term tags can stay on. So they don't corrode as quickly in the water, and they're able to stay on these sharks as they go down to deeper depths. So hopefully the new research coming out will be able to give us more long-term data, which is cool. Yeah. Yeah, really good question. So the largest recorded is 18 meters. 18, yeah, which is like really hard to fathom. 18 meters is huge. But usually at Ningaloo, the juvenile male is about between 4 to 8 meters. And then above 8 to 9 meters, we say, is coming into an adult, but that also depends for males on the size of their claspers. So males have 2 claspers, which is essentially their penises. And that is how you can measure the maturity of a male whale shark as well. So a lot of the aggregation sites are much smaller, but at places like St. Helena and which is where we find predominantly female whale sharks. They've been up to the 12, 15 meter mark. The first whale shark I saw was 10 meters, and that was huge. I was like, oh my God, 10 meters is massive. Oh, nice. But yeah, it's kind of daunting because they're not just big in length, they're also really wide. So when that's coming at you, you're a bit like, oh, I don't really know where to go. So yeah, it's really exciting. Did you enjoy it? Good. Good. So this is like an unknown really question. So we think about, well, I think it's like, I'm looking at you again for this, but I don't know. I think it's like, because we haven't been able to get a long-term data set of a whale shark from birth to complete adulthood in captivity. So in Georgia and in Okinawa, they've got a couple of whale sharks in aquariums. And so Georgia Aquarium does a lot of research on them. They're about 8 meters, but they think that that's going to be the way that we can tell the age of them, because a tag can't stay on a whale shark for that long, and there hasn't been that long of the photo IDs for us to be able to do the age estimates on them. So it's quite an important question that we need to know, because they're such slow growing as well, that if they don't reach their like peak by the time they're like 30 or 40, that's really important for conservation as well, because we don't really want to be injuring or killing off the younger generation if it's not able to get older to reproduce. Yeah, they are fish. So I think the whale part comes in just because of their size. Yeah, but they are actually the largest fish. So they're a shark essentially. Yeah, so that's often where a lot of people get lost with them as well, because it's got the whale part in it, but the whale part is just primarily due to the size. No, it's not silly. Yeah. No, not plastic. So we actually, when the pop-off tags, they basically come to the surface, they ping a signal, and we've got this piece of equipment that kind of looks like a washing line that you put on your headphones with, and you can listen to the beep, and then we can go out and collect a lot of these tags as well for the short-term deployment. But often not, the tags will sit in the current and then just wash up on a beach, and someone generally will pick them up and give us a call with them. They're just made from like a, oh God, I completely forgot what they're made from. They're just like the actual tag itself is made from, oh God, I can't remember. There's like, it's like steel on the tags. And then the casing itself is just built onto the tag. So it's not like separate pieces of equipment in terms of this. And then you've got like the wire and everything as well. But it's not generally adding to the, well, sometimes I think they might be. But often not, that we do a lot of research, it can add to the ocean, which is really sad.